Chapter 17. No Time for Nonsense. Days left, 133. Standing in front of me was the direct descendant of Vector Lulamoon. Well, more like she was being held there in Luna's magic as she struggled to get free. Starlight was just looking at her friend with confusion, probably wondering why Trixie was making such a fuss. Luna just glared at the unicorn being held in her magic, she and I both knowing that the mare had some answers to a few of our questions, or at the very least, some relevant information that will lead us to said answers. Wasp and Zeri sat and giggled with childlike amusement as they watched Trixie struggle. Though not wanting to watch this anymore, I asked Starlight and Luna if either of them knew any spells for calming someone down. If Trixie kept going on like this, she'd end up exhausting herself and might pass out before we got any information out of her. Starlight smiled and nodded before aiming her horn at her friend and charging her magic, only to be stopped by Luna. Starlight and I looked to her confused before she told us both that Twilight had informed her of the other times that Starlight had tried to use magic to alter some pony's mental state, none of which ended well. Starlight chuckled nervously with a light blush, and I just groaned in annoyance, asking Luna if she knew any spells that could help. She smiled and said she knew a few methods of bringing a pony back to reality, but we'd all better cover our ears. Having overheard some of Luna's night courts, I knew what was coming. Wasp, Zeri, Starlight, and I jumped back and covered our ears as Luna took in a deep breath and unleashed her royal Canterlot voice onto the struggling magician. Even with my ears covered, it still hurt them a little. Starlight and the changelings were hiding behind me with their ears covered in Starlight's magic. Luna really went all out on that one. Trixie was now frozen in place, from both shock and what I can only guess was fear. I don't blame her for falling into such a state. Luna was a scary mare. When all our ears had stopped ringing, Luna looked over to us and apologized for going overboard. Seems she still has to learn to restrain herself a little. Starlight walked over to her paralyzed friend and gently shook her to bring her back to some state of consciousness. When Trixie came to, she held her ears with a whimper and shuddered slightly. Before any of us could ask any questions, she shouted out in what I assume was desperation, saying she wanted nothing to do with her family's history or whatever else we were involved in. Confused, I walked forward and knelt down in front of her, asking her what she meant. She seemed to cower as I approached, refusing to look at me for a few seconds. When she glanced at my eyes, hers widened and she looked confused, saying something about my eyes not being red. Luna moved in to question Trixie, but I put my arm out to stop her. I asked why my eyes would ever be anything other than blue, but she didn't answer that question. Thinking for a moment, I asked her what she could tell me about Vector. Her ears perked up at the mention of his name. She just muttered something about only knowing that he was her distant ancestor and that he had told his family that they should never again become involved with whatever the cult was doing and to make sure his journals were either destroyed or protected. It was unfortunate to hear that some of the journals may have been destroyed, but hopefully any that are still intact can give us enough information to fill in the blanks ourselves. I sat down and pulled out my medallion, asking her if she recognized it. She nodded and told me that it held the same symbol as many artifacts and emblems of the cult, and that each member of the cult had some weird fixation on the medallion itself, after what she said were called mass visions. And before I could even ask, she explained that the mass visions were caused by the cult's rituals involving the Order of Tranquility, which would cause all within a certain range to have the same vision. Apparently, these were used to convert many towns and villages to the cult's ways and beliefs. With the way she was answering, I knew she was starting to get more comfortable, and I was wondering why, until I saw Starlight out of the corner of my eye, casting some spell on Trixie, probably to make her more cooperative. Well, whatever she did certainly made talking to Trixie easier, even if the third-person speech was a little odd. I could see there was still fear and worry in her eyes, and some of her words had to be forced out. It was as if the words she was saying would kill her at any moment. I figured it was time to ask the big questions, I asked her about the spell that was cast on me. I asked about the dark figure, and I asked about what I had to do with whatever it was that the cult wanted to accomplish. Unfortunately, she didn't have any clear answers to those. She couldn't remember her family telling her anything about a countdown spell or a dark shadowy figure. I sighed, knowing that I wouldn't have those answers today. She did, however, know about a few temple locations we could look into, telling us that she'd give the locations to us if we left and didn't involve her in this mess anymore. As I was about to get up and tell the others to get ready to leave, I felt a shiver run down my spine, and the area seemed to become darker. Suddenly, Starlight collapsed, as did Trixie, the Changeling twins, and Luna. I shook Luna and the others to try to wake them up, but they didn't respond. Their hearts were beating, thank God, but they weren't moving. The pain in my chest returned, and I collapsed to my knees, looking around frantically trying to find what was causing this. That's when I saw them. Clockwork and the figure were standing a few feet away from me, Clockwork grinning evilly while the figure just looked at me with its dead, glowing red eyes. Its shape had become far clearer now looking more and more like a human, but still missing a lot of features and proportions. I tried to speak, but I couldn't make a sound. Suddenly, the figure was right up at my face, glaring into my soul with its deathly glare. The next thing I know, I feel a blast of pain in my chest, and I fall unconscious. Clockwork's laughter being the last thing I hear before falling into the darkness.